Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh coming out with a statement this morning, publishing regarding the possibility of a hostage negotiation. It's really nothing new, the statement, is it? As saying that they're still keeping their firm lines that until a total ceasefire is on the table, they don't want to release any hostages.
Well, Nicole, I don't want to get on a news show and say there's nothing new. So
we seem to be at an impasse.
I can point to something, which is the fact that he puts out the statement. The proactivity coming from the Hamas leadership does suggest that they're feeling some pressure to show some movement, which is logical to me, because in a less twisted world, sure, there would be pressure on Israel, as there is, but there would be more pressure on Hamas. That started the war, and that has brought a disaster upon the people of Gaza. And that could end the war in 2 seconds by handing over the hostages, laying down its arms, handing the Strip back to the PA. I assume Israel would allow that, and probably agreeing to an exile for its leadership. So I would expect Hamas finally to be feeling some pressure, perhaps behind closed doors. We don't see it in public, and that may reflect in this statement. Now, the statement itself, you're right, is nothing new. The impasse that you reference is if you're talking about a total release of all the hostages. For that, Hamas, which views the hostages as some version of a life insurance, is going to demand an end to the war, and that Israel can't give, basically. So the way out of this potentially is a partial deal for a temporary ceasefire. That is where mathematics takes you. Now, global affairs do not always conform to logic and the Euclidean universe and mathematics. So we shall see where it goes. But there is a lot of international trepidation about moving to Rafah without a removing of the displaced people who have been displaced into Rafah, and in general, there is a growing impatience to the point of the end of the credit line, with the destruction and the deaths to civilians, without at least the Israeli government presenting a post-war horizon that looks like something other than what Ben-Gvir would contemplate.
Well, that's what French President Emmanuel Macron just yesterday said, that the Rafah operation, if and when it does happen, this is going to be a turning point in the war. Specifically, probably seeing how different international allies might continue or not continue to stand with Israel.
On the other hand, you could construct a different narrative that says, look, it's been incredibly ugly. I think realistic people knew it would be ugly. I think Israel played the diplomatic side rather abysmally, but perhaps, all that having been said, Rafah is the last stand, and Israel should do whatever it can to minimize the ugliness, and I very much hope they do. I wish I had more confidence.
Well, speaking about what's happening in Rafah, there's also new reports, not just with the civilians that are there, but we're seeing more aid trucks enter as well. The new report seems to show video of Hamas shooting and killing a Palestinian teenager who was trying to get some aid off of a truck. Now, this also comes as a top U.S. diplomat denies allegations that Hamas steals aid shipments and uses it for their own being, yet now we're seeing some of this evidence that's clearly indicates, and we've seen other footage also in the past of Hamas terrorists riding on top of some of these humanitarian aid trucks. Yeah. That whole question also continues to be looming.
If there's anything I've learned in decades of journalism and foreign correspondency, it's not to take at face value anything said by top diplomats of any country in the middle of war. Of course, Hamas commandeers the aid and uses it for patronage. Of course, Hamas shoots at anyone who tries to get in their way in Gaza. They're
civilians.
They're a terrorist mafia running a police state.
Well, I want to also talk about more and more allegations coming out, not just with the misplacement or mistreatment of humanitarian aid, but also one of the aid agencies, UNRWA. More and more allegations coming out. Just yesterday, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant reviewing some more information, and as of this morning, a new report also showing what appears to be new footage of an UNRWA social worker on October 7th here in Israel, taking the body of a killed Israeli. We're seeing more and more of this evidence, but what is it mounting to? What's going to happen to the UN agency that's operating in the Gaza Strip?
UNRWA's role is critical, even if UNRWA itself is massively flawed. Israel doesn't want to run the schools. Israel because of the lack of wisdom of the current government, doesn't even want the PA to take over in Gaza. Some people view UNRWA as more or less a Palestinian civilian government. They run hospitals and clinics. They distribute aid and food. They run the schools. Unfortunately, they haven't rebelled against the Palestinian curriculum, which is terrible and needs to be revised. UNRWA has become complicit and has become part and parcel of a society, the Palestinian society, that is traumatized and that is mobilized to jihad, very unfortunately, and among huge swaths of it. And UNRWA reflects that. Is that acceptable? It's bad. It's bad. But Israel here, as with so much else, has to choose the least bad option. And I'm not sure that destroying UNRWA and really taking a hit on UNRWA and exposing everything it's done wrong and reveling in its dissolution would leave Israel in a better position. So my strong suspicion is that what we're looking at is a leveraging of this terrible war to reboot many things in the Middle East. Many things.
How so?
What happened can't continue. Okay? This is no way to go through life. The massacre, the nature of this war. By the way, Israeli settlement in the West Bank, deep inside the territory, when they have no intention of making the Palestinians their citizens, the whole thing is wrong. The fact that Lebanon doesn't give citizenship to third-generation Lebanese because they came from Palestine is wrong. The fact that UNRWA is part of a system that tells the Palestinians, who are descendants 3 generations removed and live 10 miles away from where their great-great-grandparents lived, that they're refugees and are ever going back home. This hereditary refugee status, all of it has to change. All of it. The fact that Israel and Saudi Arabia are in some kind of fake state of war. So basically, there's a cliche about how it's always darkest before the dawn. It's certainly darkest right now, and there is at least some hope. And I think those of us who don't want to let the inhumanity that was visited upon us make ourselves inhuman would grasp that hope that we might be headed towards a dawn. Now, a fixing of UNRWA is a small part of that dawn. There's actually bigger things that need to happen.
And would you elaborate on what those bigger things are? You're talking about just changing and reshifting the entire political game field, it seems, in the Middle East.
I think so. I would like to see Israel embrace this mega deal that the West and the Arabs seem prepared to offer, that would include peace with much of the Arab world, but not real peace, like commercial normalization that is total. The Arab world's assistance and the West assistance, and really creating an incentive for the Palestinians to revise their thinking. The turning of Gaza into the world's problem, not just Israel's problem. The removal of Hamas from power. A tremendous global tens of millions of dollars billions of dollars in what might amount to an international Marshall Plan to fix Gaza and to build Palestine in exchange for a real revision of how the PA conducts itself, an end to their jihadist curriculum in the schools, probably an end to the payments to the families of terrorists going forward, an end to their demands for a total right of return, an understanding that you can't divide Jerusalem. And Israel would have to basically declare that it understands that at the end of this process will be a 2-state solution and a Palestinian state, because the only alternative to that is a binational state that isn't Jewish. Now, when this is on the table, even though there is a need to frame it in a way that prevents the jihadis of the Middle East from convincing the youth that Hamas is somehow won and received the reward for October 7th. If there was some way to frame it that way, to avoid that framing, I think Israel should grab this. A government of Israel that had the slightest vision, and it wasn't reckless, and it wasn't purely negative in its approach, and essentially was willing to live by the sword until the end of days. Such a government, which I think is conceivable in Israel, I think is in the offing, indeed, would engage with this offer. Because the world is not prepared to see many thousands more civilians die in Gaza when the Israeli side is not engaging with a vision for peace.
Engaging in that peace, especially when it means partnering with different Arab countries, especially engaged in a common threat.
Of course.
That being Iran. We continue to see the threat.
I didn't even mention Iran. You're very right. That would go a long way to neutralizing Iran, weakening it. Indeed, the prize to Hamas for October 7th would be to prevent talk of peace, to allow peace with Saudi Arabia to not happen. That was the goal. To derail what appeared to be imminent normalization with Saudi Arabia, certainly one of the goals. To the extent that Iran was involved in goading them on, which I think is what happened there, that was the reason. The timing was not coincidental.
Let's focus on Iran also as we continue to see them using their proxies, whether it be Hamas or Hezbollah on the northern border as well. We are seeing things seemingly escalating throughout the week on the northern border. Now there's some reports coming out that U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is going to return to Israel and Lebanon, try and lower these escalations. But is that possible? Over the past week, we've seen deadly incidences both in Israel and in Lebanon, and it seems that there's going to continue to be this tit-for-tat retaliation.
Well, Israel certainly doesn't want a massive war with Hezbollah, where there is a risk of dangerous rockets that are not that are not going to be possible to zap out of the sky with Iron Dome, landing on Tel Aviv. That said, it can't tolerate the current situation.
Of course.
It's tried to make this Lebanon's problem essentially by threatening Lebanon, but the government of Lebanon has no power. They don't even have a chief of staff for the military. They don't have a president, and our country's essentially occupied by Iran via Hezbollah. It's a very dangerous situation, and there too, I think the world would be wise to step in with a plan to save Lebanon as well.